Hello there. This is Yogi for day 28 of my 30-day video challenge I'm doing this June. And today I want to talk about conversations and conflicts and how conflicts can be resolved a lot of times by conversations. But there are two different kinds of conversations or rather two different modes of conversation. One is predominantly emotional conversation where we are connecting to somebody's emotion, getting into their shoes, understanding where they're coming from. And second is logical conversation where we are uh, going back to logic and what makes sense instead of really, we don't really necessarily have to connect, or we might already have a connection, so we don't have to focus on that part. And I feel like both modes are important. For example, if a friend of mine is hurt by what I said, then getting into a logical mode where I'm trying to explain what I said was right and it made sense, it doesn't serve much purpose. At that point, connecting emotionally, apologizing for causing hurt is the kind of conversation that would make the most sense. And later on, we can go back to logical and try to explain why things turned out the way they turned out. Or on the other hand, imagine a a kid throwing rocks down a bridge where people are kayaking downstairs. At that point, trying to, I think the most useful thing to do is to, in a very logical way, stop the kid from doing that. And later on, maybe we can connect to them and explain to them why that is the case. But in the moment, the logical part of the conversation and action would make the most sense, not the emotional part. Although the emotional part will be important to make the behavior long term. As we saw in the previous two examples, a conversation proceeds in steps. The first step can be emotional, then can be logical. For example, in my friend's case, I first respond in an emotional way, apologizing for causing hurt, and then later on, maybe if I feel like I have a point there, then maybe I can later on explain to him why I did what I did in a very logical way. But we have to first go emotional, then logical, or vice versa, logical or emotional. But this sequence keeps going in conversations. It goes in tandem, like logical, emotional. And if we insist on first having the logic right before we respond to any emotional component of a conversation, that can be used as an excuse to not take action. I recently listened to a talk by Malcolm Gladwell where he talks about how American football causes a lot of damage to brains of the athlete who play the football, and the football association doesn't isn't really willing to take action to enact rule changes and or stop the football, or at least at the college level. He was talking about how Penn State can stop college students from playing the football. And the reason that they give is that it's not very clear, it's logically not very clear in an airtight way that football does cause brain damage. But it's almost clear to many people, but lack of that airtight logical proof is keeping people from taking action. On the other hand, if we insist on that there has to be an emotional component to the conversation before we take any action, we won't listen to a logical component at all. That can be a sign that we are hiding our insecurities, we are hiding some fears that we have, that we are not responding to something logical. So that can be another sign that we gotta focus on the logical side. So both things are important. It's just that at different times, different modes of conversation are more useful. Speaking of how both logical and emotional component or modes of conversation are useful, they can be useful in unexpected circumstances actually. I am listening or reading a book named Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, who was an FBI hostage negotiator. And he talks about how, while talking to terrorists or kidnappers, his strategy was first to connect to them emotionally and try to understand their motives and where they're coming from, and connect to them as person to person uh, before he was able to get to logistic about how to proceed. So in this case, it seems like an emotional connection or emotional conversation will not be very useful, but he says that it is actually very useful in the hostage negotiation circumstances, which I found pretty unexpected. On the other hand, sometimes a logical conversation can be more useful than we think emotional one might do. I have an example from my own life where I used to be afraid of flying in the planes, but not really flying in the planes, but more like the turbulence in the plane when the plane starts shaking. I used to be very scared of that. And over time, talking to certain people and then just thinking about myself, I realized that at a very logical level that there's nothing I could do at that time. When plane is kind of going through turbulence and it's shaking like crazy, there's nothing I could do to make things better. And that logical argument, even though it's very fearful, that made sense to me. And over time, now I can sip through tea while the plane is going through turbulence, and it doesn't bother me very much. So in a way, I thought that an emotional component of a conversation might be useful in that kind of fearful circumstance, but for me, a logical conversation seemed to do the trick. To conclude, I would like to suggest that next time you are in a conversation, or especially in a conflict conversation or some sort of a crucial conversation, you think about how to respond in a logical way or an emotional way. And after thinking through it, respond in a way that is most appropriate for the conversation or most appropriate for the situation. Again, neither logical nor emotional response is better than the other. It's just that different situations demand different responses, and the balance between the two is the most important thing. And realizing which one is more important when, and responding appropriately is the most important. That is all I have for today. Thank you very much.